Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the National Child Passenger Safety Board, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us for the Community Education webinar, Heatstroke ED Talk. Get ready as we learn today from several subject matter experts who will share some of the latest information in heat stroke research and prevention efforts. Our speakers today are all members of the Pediatric Vehicular Heat Stroke, or PVH, academic workshop group, where persons from a variety of backgrounds meet to advance the next steps in pediatric vehicular heat stroke countermeasures. I am Tammy Franks. I am the curriculum representative on the National Child Passenger Safety Board and will be serving as your moderator today. Next slide, please. A few reminders as we get started. We ask that you are operating a motor vehicle, that you do not participate in this webinar. It is being recorded, and the recording will be posted to carseateducation.org in approximately 1 to 2 days. If you are a child passenger safety technician, joining us today, this presentation will meet your community education requirement for recertification. Next slide, please. We will have left time at the end of the webinar for questions. If you would please enter your questions in the Q&A box. We will do our best to monitor them and share them with the presenters after all of the presenters have finished presenting. Next slide, please. We have 4 speakers joining us today, and they will each provide their own brief introduction at the beginning of their presentations. So I hope that you join me now in thanking each of them for joining us today. And first up, we have Jan Null, who will set up the talk by providing an overview of heat stroke data that we have as of April 2023. Jan.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm a adjunct professor of meteorology at San Jose State University, and I'm also the person behind noheatstroke.org. And the information I'm going to be sharing fairly rapidly over about the next 10 minutes, just sort of give you a context of the scope of the problem of PVH and some of the data and numbers that are behind it. And so you don't have to scribble lots of notes. All this material is available on noheatstroke.org. And also my contact information if you need any of it, and it can be freely used with attribution, of course. Next. So here's our problem. In the last 24 years, there have been 942 PVH deaths around the country. We've had, fortunately, in the last 3 years, due to changes in people's lifestyle and travel patterns and things, we have seen the numbers of deaths go down, but that was following 2 very, very disastrous years in 2018 and 2019. Next. As you would expect, in the summer months, we see these numbers begin to go up. April with 37, and then we get into May 92, and then we're in and around the 200 range through June, July, and August before we start cooling back off around the country. Next. If anything can be done to adjust where it looks like we're cutting off the very bottom of the screen. This is looking at the deaths, the first death each year. The average date is toward the end of March. This year, unfortunately, the first death was on May 27th. Next. The PVH deaths fall into 3 broad categories. The first are children who are forgotten in cars. It accounts for a little bit over half the cases. And within that category, 47% of those are where they have not been dropped off at daycare, babysitting, childcare, something in that category. Really an area that needs to be stressed with those sorts of journeys where children are left in cars. The next broad category is the gained access category, where about a quarter of the PVH deaths are the result of a child getting into a car on their own and either be getting overcome by the heat or trapping themselves in the car, possibly due to safety locks, not knowing that they can get out of the front seat, things like that. And then the last 20% or so are where you have a parent knowingly leaves a child in a car while they think some other activity that they're going to do is going to be more important. Next. This is a distribution by the day of the week. You can see it sort of ramps up as we get into Thursday and Friday, and I think the psychologists will point to this, I think, and look at that's when people are more tired at the end of the week. Lots of other sort of related issues associated with that. Next. So, and to break it down by each of the circumstances categories, you see that we have again that forgotten category increases as we get on in toward the latter half of the week. And then next. And gained access also, as would be intuited, would be that you have more children at home to gain access in the on the weekend days. And finally, in the knowingly left category, sort of spread fairly evenly across the week. And so, all of these, as we've said many times in these discussions, are totally preventable, and but hopefully these sorts of statistics will help the people doing messaging and other associated activity to focus advertising messaging onto, for example, the forgotten category, on toward the end of the week, the gained access category, maybe on the weekends. Next. Over half the children that die of PVH are a year or under, and the average age is just over 2 years of age. And then as we get into the toddler and the preschooler ages, then the numbers do drop off. Next. And then just to break it down by the circumstances categories, forgotten tends to be a little bit younger age, averaging about 18 months. And next. And gained access, as you would suspect, are going to be the older ages where they can physically get into a car. Next. And the knowingly left sort of breaks down in the in about the same as the overall. Next. So the overall the instances of total deaths are 38% by the moms and 25% by the dads, and then where both parents have the responsibility, about 11, and then smaller percentages as we look at the other categories. Next, thank you. Forgotten category, fairly similar breakdown. Next. Gained access, a little bit higher percentage with the moms. That may be just because children are at home more with a mother than a father. And then the knowingly left category, and I don't know how to explain this. The percentages really are skewed toward mothers in this category. Next. Just over half the cases happen in the home driveway or in the in an adjacent property or some place very close to home. Approaching a quarter of the cases are in the parking lot of a person's workplace, and then childcare, vans and properties account for about 7%. Next. And you would think that, that we can only have these very hottest days or when these cases take place. And, certainly we have over half the cases are 90 degrees or higher. But if you look on down, it can happen temperatures in the 70s. And we've had a small percentage where they have been in the category less than 70 degrees. So, it doesn't have to be the hotter instances. Next. The distribution across the country is certainly concentrated along the warmer southern tier of states, also areas that have higher sun angles that account for cars heating up at a higher rate. Next, you're fine. And then this just breaks it down per capita, because some of those states have smaller populations, and so to look at it, the worst cases then here are where you have more than 25 deaths per million children, and those are that dark brown color with the reds in that next category. Next, and then finally, we only have 21 states that have unattended child laws, and several of those have a minimum amount of time. In Missouri, there's a 10-minute time limit. And it's only against the law if a child is injured or dies. In Texas, it's a 5-minute rule. You can leave a child for 5 minutes. In Florida, you can leave a child for 15 minutes without it being criminalized. And my favorite is Rhode Island, where there is no penalty or record. You can be reprimanded by a law enforcement officer, but no record can be kept of that. Thanks. And so this is my contact information. Again, almost everything that you saw here is available on noheatstroke.org. Most of the graphics came from the Pediatric Vehicular Heat Stroke by the Numbers, which is a PDF document, and also individual slides on the website. I we'll be putting in the chat a link to a list of all the PVH cases going back to 1998. And if any of you know of any instances that are not on that list, please get in touch with me, because we know that there are cases for one reason or another go under the radar. And also, I maintain a notification list through a listserv when there is a new instance and around the country, or updates as far as some of the other data. I will send out an information reminder about that. Send me an email if you would like to be added to that distribution. So thanks for your interest, and if any of you have questions, I will certainly be around.
Jan, thank you so much for getting us started today. We appreciate it. And next up is Andy Grundstein.
Hi, everyone. My name's Andy Grundstein. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Georgia, and my background's actually in climate science, and I do a lot of work with heat and human health and safety. So today, what I'd like to jump off from what Jan had talked about is look at PVH, and in particular, parent and caregiver perceptions of their susceptibility and what those implications might mean for public health messaging. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Piper Crace, Alan Stewart at the University of Georgia, Jan Null, who just spoke, and Castle Williamsburg, associated with NOAA. Next slide, please. I think Jan already gave us a good sense about this, but PVH is the leading cause of non-traffic related fatalities of children in the US. Since 1998, we've seen 942 deaths at least. Next slide, please. And when you break things down, again, about over half are forgotten, and that's going to be the theme of my talk today. 20% are knowingly left behind, and about a quarter gain access. Next slide, please. They're dealing with PVH involves a multifaceted approach. There's been public health messaging. I have a few examples there, certainly not an exhaustive list. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Where's Baby? Check for Baby. In Georgia, look again, there's a variety of these messaging campaigns. There's legal unattended child laws and technology reminder and detection products that you can install in your car. Next slide. So one of the questions is, are these interventions working? And as Jan said, you look at the trends here, and the last few years have been a little bit unusual because of COVID, but it's really difficult to discern a downward trend. So trying to get some insight into what parent and caregivers are thinking, so that at least from a public health standpoint, we could focus our messaging. Small qualitative study Dr. Williams and I conducted found that parent and caregivers did not think that they could forget their own children. And again, our focus here is on that forgotten category. So we want to delve more into this and look at a slightly larger study so that we could understand this better and possibly come up with recommendations for public health messaging. Next slide. So we used a national Qualtrics survey. We surveyed parent and caregivers who had children that were under 5 and who also drove a vehicle. We tried to obtain a diverse sample, so we had people with a variety of incomes. We had respondents from all over the country, warmer and colder regions. We had people responding from urban, rural, and suburban locations. Mostly they were from urban and suburban locations in our study, both men and women and various ethnicities. We had a total of 127 responses. And when we framed our questions, we framed it in the context of the health belief model. And in particular, we wanted to know about their perceived susceptibility, because as in our smaller qualitative survey, many parents didn't find themselves personally susceptible. We also looked at severity. So we asked them questions on a Likert scale from 1 to 7, 1 meaning strongly disagree and 7 strongly agree. We had 2 susceptibility questions. Please indicate your agreement or disagreement with the following statements. I believe I'm at risk of forgetting a child in a car. We asked a second susceptibility question. I believe my chances of forgetting a child in a car are high. We found those responses were very similar. We also asked a severity question. I would be devastated if I were to forget a child in a car. Next slide. So these are our results from susceptibility. And you can see both questions we had very similar responses. Overwhelmingly, parents and caregivers strongly disagreed that they were at risk for forgetting a child in a car. You can see the median was 1, the mean was 2.4 on both of them. Next slide. With the severity, though, parents did find that this is a serious concern, or this is a serious matter if they left a child in the car. So overwhelmingly, they strongly agreed that they would be very upset if they had forgotten a child in a car. Next slide. So the take-home points here is that our findings support what we had found in our earlier qualitative study, that parents and caregivers mostly did not believe themselves personally susceptible to forgetting a child in a car. But parents also did find the concept of PVH serious. When we go back to the qualitative study, that provides some context for our findings. When my co-author, Castle Williams, interviewed the parents and caregivers, they found that they mentioned lifestyle factors, single parent, low income parent. They believed were more likely to forget a child than they personally would be. When we also interviewed some experts in PVH, they mentioned that some of the more sensational accounts that make it, on TV about parents forgetting cars reinforces the idea that it's an irresponsible or even a bad parent that would do this, not them. Next slide. So the question is, how can we use our information to help, shape or improve some of our communication strategies? And I think the first thing is that, at least in terms of the forgetting circumstance, and I think the first thing is people don't feel susceptible to this, even though it can happen to almost anyone. So increase the perceived susceptibility. And one of the ways of communicating that would be to show that it can happen to anyone, even people that are, pillars of the community, doctors, police officers, pastors, other people. We found some recent research in natural hazards that also suggests that making it clear this can happen to anyone and not having a list of vulnerable people can also help personalize it, because when you have a list of particular people, people don't see themselves among that list. And I had one other note here. The other thing I will mention is in some literature looking at communicating heat hazards to certain vulnerable populations like older adults, they suggested that not only talking to that population, but a secondary group that can help share that information and guide them. For instance, with older adults, it may have been a nurse that sees them frequently. So there might be some applications here where perhaps a teacher or a medical professional like a nurse or pediatrician can also help reinforce these messages to parents and caregivers that this can happen to them as well. And as a multiplier effect, talk to many people that can help shape people's decision-making. Next slide. And for future work, we'd like to evaluate these recommendations to make sure that making some of these changes will increase a parent and caregiver's perceived threat, and more importantly, promote some type of behavioral change where they will be cognizant of a child in a car and they'll take notice to check the back seat or leave visual cues to prevent children from being left in there, or even purchase a product that can help remind them that a child's in the car. Next slide, thank you. And I have my contact information on there. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to speak with you about our findings.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. We appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. And next we have Sharon Ruggieri joining us.
One second while I get everything.
That looks good, Sharon.
All right, great. So I'm Sharon Ruggieri. I'm the Director of Product Management for Evenflo Company. And I actually work for Good Baby International. So I'm the product owner for the sensor safe technology across Evenflo and Cybex. My focus on, mechanical engineer by education. I switched over to business via an MIT Sloan MBA, and I've been doing IoT connected product management for about a decade now. And I'm going to take you through aftermarket heat stroke prevention technologies and products. So just to introduce you to the type of things that I'm going to talk about. On the left are the vehicle integrated technologies. I put some buckets here. Those can be, you may have heard about the radar that can be installed in vehicles, or the rear door reminder systems. Those are two types of technologies that are integrated in the vehicle. Those are not what I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about what you can purchase that is not native to the vehicle. And these are the aftermarket technologies. Some categories of these types of products could be the pressure sensing pads, which are designed to be placed under the child. The sensor safe technology is integrated into the chest clip of the Evenflo and Cybex car seats. There are power sensors. Those can be plugged into your cigarette lighter. Those are intended to emit reminders to check the back seat. There are products that can be installed on the vehicle. Those are like aftermarket door sensing systems or rear door reminder systems. And then there are clip-ons, and those clip-ons are secondary items to the car seat, and they usually attach to the harness of the seat, of the child restraint. Not everything on this, some of these products are available in the US, some are in other markets around the world, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So these technologies have a wide range of effectiveness. So they're not equal in how they perform in terms of detecting the presence of a child in the vehicle. And one piece of research that I like to refer people to, there was a report out of, it's a bit of a long, the National Surface Transportation Safety Center for Excellence. I had the pleasure of speaking to Laurel Glenn, one of the researchers on this project. It was from 2021. And they did a very comprehensive study that I recommend reading if you're interested in this, about the effectiveness of the technologies that are available in the US. They scored it based on effectiveness at addressing the scenario, ease of use, how it gains the caregiver's attention, and interference with other systems in the vehicle. So that's a really good reference. In general, I should also state that everything that I'm sharing here is based on my personal opinion, not necessarily a stance of Evenflo, but from what I'm seeing, these vehicle integrated radar and ultrasonic systems are likely to be the most effective at detecting life signs in the vehicle, whether it be a child, a dog, etc. And it's one of the most promising technologies. However, we know that the average age of a vehicle on the road is over 12 years old. And we can't ignore everybody who doesn't have a brand new car with this advanced. Very few have them right now. So we see aftermarket products as a way to fill the gap. So that way you don't have to go and buy a new car to have a system to detect the presence of a child in the vehicle. But I'm really glad Andy went before me, because you see the challenge to that is they also require the caregiver to acknowledge the problem and choose to use one of these devices. So what I'm going to show you, I consider, I know Andy talked a little bit about how there are non-technology products you can buy to remind you that there's a child in the vehicle, but I'm going to show you technology products. So I define those as electronic or digital products. And I'm going to show you products that are available in the US. So available right now means they have a website, you can buy them, and if they have an app, that the app is live. Unfortunately, even since 2021, some of the ones shown on this list have disappeared. That's a hard reality in our market, is these aftermarket anti-abandonment products, they come and go because it's tough to sell a product that parents don't see or caregivers don't see an urgent need for. And like I said, I'm not endorsing the effectiveness of these products because it's quite varied. So these are, the first bucket I grouped was app plus hardware products. So these are products that come with a piece of hardware that connects to a mobile app. That's where SensorSafe falls. That's my technology, the one that I manage. So SensorSafe is a smart chest clip that connects to a mobile app, and it uses Bluetooth signal strength to detect a parent that has moved away from a buckled child. The LFO E-clip is a clip-on. They designed it to be attached to the harness of the child restraint. And it uses Bluetooth technology as well to connect the mobile app and detects that distance between the phone and the clip. These products may have other functions, but I'm just focusing on their anti-abandonment functions. One that seems to have less penetration, but I found it online, so I'm classifying it as available, was the Bobby pad, and that's a pressure pad. So those pads go under the child, between the child and the seat, and it's detecting the presence of the child in the seat and using Bluetooth to connect to a mobile app. And then a recent announcement that I'm actually really looking forward to is Duna. So Duna announced that they're going to be launching the Sense Alert system, which is also a pressure pad, connects to a mobile phone, and uses Bluetooth distance. As I go through these products, the things to remember, I talked to Jessica briefly about, do we recommend these products to parents? And the thing to remember there is always, I'm also a car seat trained car seat tech. I was trained as a car seat technician. You should always go back to the training there, because you never want to recommend a product that's going to interfere with the performance of the seat as intended by the manufacturer. So follow whatever guidance is provided, follow your car seat technician training, and follow the car seat manufacturer's instructions when choosing whether or not to recommend these products. These are hardware only products. So these ones do not have a mobile app that they connect to. The Ride and Remind system requires a professional installation, but it's kind of like an aftermarket rear door reminder system. Then there's a product, Steelmate Little Helper. It comes with a pressure pad, and it comes with a driver buckle and a cigarette lighter outlet. So it uses a combination of sensing to detect that there's a child in the vehicle. There's the car seat co-pilot. That one's a secondary clip. So in addition to the clip that's on the harness, you can clip that onto the car seat, and it connects to a key fob there. So there it's detecting the distance between the key fob and the clip and sending that alarm when the caregiver moves out of range. And then lastly on the slide, I have the Clever Ellie. Simple but effective, right? You just plug it into the cigarette lighter and it emits an audible alarm when the vehicle is turned off. All right, so I wanted to highlight the fact that, so we talked about how in the US, we kind of have a problem where parents don't necessarily see a need for these products. What's happening internationally is really interesting, because Italy was the first. In 2019, they required these products by law. And you see an explosion in the market for these aftermarket devices, because quickly everybody had to have something to put in their car seat. And then Israel was the country that followed that in August 2021. And so these countries are requiring aftermarket, or some, it can be native to the seat or the vehicle, but some technology for the preventing leaving a child behind in a vehicle for any child 0 to 4 years of age, for both existing car seats and the market and new car seat purchases. And so my eyes are very often on Italy, because this is just a fraction of the devices that went on the market in the months, some possibly ready to go even before the law came into place. But many solutions became available to parents. Most of them the pressure pad, because that seemed to be a quick one to bring to market. And there are lots of brands that have versions of pressure pads. Maxi Cosi has one. They have a pressure pad in Italy. Kiko has the clip-on, so that one goes on the harness. But lots of technologies, aftermarket technologies available in Italy. But I want to talk about how these technologies are not flawless, right? As no technology is. The example I like to bring up is your Bluetooth headphones, right? So many of these apps, first the ones using mobile apps, we face the same challenge if you think about a set of Bluetooth headphones. And if you walk away from your computer, you lose that connection, right? And that's how anti-abandonment is designed to work. But you may lose that connection even when you didn't mean to or didn't walk away. And that's because using Bluetooth can be interrupted by many things. There are many materials that can interrupt the Bluetooth connection. And there's, especially on Android, there's a large variation in the performance of Bluetooth by mobile device. So Bluetooth is not an exact measure of distance. So we're trying to use an imperfect technology on something that is of critical importance. That's one challenge we face there. And then we face the challenge that the caregiver can do whatever they want, right? Like if we're an app, I've tried as hard as I can to scream at them. And I have this in the, not scream, I don't want to scream at the parents because we want them to do what they want to do. But I have this in the app saying, please leave the app running in the background. Do not disable notifications. Do not disable Bluetooth. Do not disable sound. Do not disable location services. Don't put your phone on silent mode. Don't enable battery optimism. All the things that we need them to allow for this type of a system to function. It's tough. And then there are hardware challenges too, right? Because since this is something that the parent has to opt in to use, with SensorSafe, we solved it by putting it in the chest cup. They're gonna buckle that chest clip every time. We hope, but what happens when they don't? We hope they're gonna buckle that chest clip every time. And in that instance, they're engaging SensorSafe. But that's something that many of our other competitors will face, is how do you get it so the parent turns it on every single time? And then give them feedback if it isn't. So that way they need some confirmation, like this is connected. We face the challenge of what vehicle manufacturers can do when we are in the vehicle, and then sometimes relying on their power, their OBD ports, the functions of the vehicle, they can change things. And then we are in trouble. There have been instances where SensorSafe used to have an OBD component, and manufacturers can block us out of that. They can change the way a vehicle records when it's on and when it's off. And so some, like the Cleverelli product, they came up with a solution to add a secondary sensor. Was it or it could have been Baby Bell or Cleverelli. They'll add a door sensor because some vehicles don't power down. That cigarette lighter will stay on. And then you'll miss that notice that car is off, child is in the vehicle. And then the challenge I mentioned about all of these aftermarket products have to be approved for use by the car seat manufacturer and crash tested by the car seat manufacturer. So another obstacle. And then power consumption to a lesser extent. And then probably my last slide, and probably the biggest challenge we face is the consumer challenge, right? The number one obstacle we face is, I don't believe it'll happen to me. And for as long as consumers don't believe it'll happen to them, they're not going to spend money on it. And if they're not going to spend money on it, how do you get corporations to invest in offering these products? So that chain is a tricky one. And so that I put a review here from our newest product. I see these types of reviews on a weekly basis. I read them all related to SensorSafe. The new Evenflo Shift Dual Ride launched in April. This is a review from April 6th. They said, I don't think it's super necessary. And that's often the language we see when people are talking about SensorSafe. And that's a barrier we face. And then not to mention the economic struggles, right? It's not cheap to have a baby. And now we're going to ask you to pay more for this technology that you don't really think you need. So that's the cost value to them. Technology isn't cheap. These things are not cheap to do. So there's a misalignment between willingness to spend and what it costs to make. And then a lesser concern, but we do get a little bit of questions about radiation, EMF. Like people do get concerned about technology, especially around the body of a young child. So sometimes we have to address that. The Bluetooth Low Energy is fairly low transmission, but it's a concern we face that may be an obstacle to some parents opting into this type of technology. That is all.
Thank you so much, Sharon. We appreciate it. And we do have some questions at the end that we'll follow up with. And I'll now turn it over to Jalaj.
All right. And just to confirm, you guys can see my screen?
You have the correct screen, yes.
Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jalaj Maheshwari, and I'm a research associate at the Center for Injury Research and Prevention at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Our center has been conducting pediatric vehicular heat stroke research for a few years now. Our first study was published in 2012 when our researchers evaluated different hyperthermia prevention technologies. More recently, we wrapped up a project looking at real-world PVH cases through police reports and identifying exemplar cases based on detection and alerting mechanisms. But today, I'll be talking about a recent study we completed on US caregivers' attitudes and risk perceptions towards pediatric vehicular heat stroke. I'd like to start off by thanking my co-investigators on the study, and the full paper on the study is currently under review in Accident Analysis and Prevention, so keep an eye out for that as well. Now, just to go over some of the background, which most of us are already aware of, data from Australia reports that greater than 5,000 children are rescued from vehicles every year. One child dies every 10 days in the US, and more than 950 pediatric vehicular heat stroke cases were reported to date since 1998. Now, when we look at pre-COVID pediatric vehicular heat stroke related cases, 53 deaths were reported in 2019, which was the highest number of deaths reported in a year. Of these cases, nearly half occurred because children were forgotten in vehicles, and half were because children were intentionally left behind or gained access to the vehicle. Now, to date, published studies or reports in the US have characterized actual PVH deaths or scenarios, explored neuropsychological perspectives on how these events occur, characterized mental models of PVH to improve messaging campaigns, and described and tested the effectiveness of risk mitigating technologies. However, several gaps in knowledge still remain around this area. First of all, PVH deaths are rare and appear to occur randomly, and there is not a clear indication of which children or caregivers are at highest risk. There is currently very limited information about how often, where, or why caregivers intentionally leave children alone in vehicles beyond that fatality data. Second, there is limited data related to caregivers' perceptions of their family's risk of PVH and their attitudes towards adopting various risk mitigating behaviors or technologies. So despite the amount of time, resources, and campaigns focused on spreading awareness of behaviors to help prevent PVH, it's unclear what reach or effect these types of campaigns have nationally. So the aim of our study was to characterize caregiver beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes related to PVH risk factors and potential mitigating technologies. And for this, we conducted a nationally representative survey of 1,500 US caregivers. Caregivers were eligible to participate if they lived in the US and were at least a part-time caregiver of at least one child less than 5 years old. The survey covered several questions around caregivers' perceptions of PVH risk for children in their care, as well as their thoughts about adopting risk mitigating technologies, scenarios in which caregivers intentionally leave children unattended in vehicles, and caregiver awareness of national PVH campaigns. So coming to the results of our study, on assessing caregiver intentions, 88% of caregivers said they never leave children alone in a vehicle. The type of caregiver that was more likely to leave children alone in a vehicle was a male caregiver, a higher educated caregiver, those caregivers with higher income, and those caring for more than one child. Now, looking at the different scenarios in which caregivers leave their children in a vehicle, 43% said they leave their child one time per month only. The duration the child is left behind was reported to be around 2 to 5 minutes, and 42% said they left the vehicle running when they left their child. Greater than 40% of caregivers said they had left a child in a vehicle in each season, which were fall, winter, spring, and summer. Now, when asked about the environments in which they left children alone in a vehicle, 52% said children were unattended when the vehicle was in the residential driveway or their front yard. 48% said parking lots, 23% said residential garages, and 16% said commercial garages. Now, the figure over here depicts the proportion of caregivers who reported believing specific reasons why children are left alone in vehicles longer than intended, shown in the dark gray plots, bar graph, as well as why children overheat in vehicles, shown in the light gray bar plots. Generally, caregivers' beliefs about the reasons underlying each scenario were similar. However, more caregivers endorsed caregivers being irresponsible and caregivers causing purposeful harm to their children as the reasons why children overheat in vehicles, compared with the number who believe the reasons that children are left longer than intended in those vehicles. Conversely, more caregivers believed caregivers becoming distracted, caregivers making honest mistakes, caregivers having little sleep or are under a lot of stress, and children gaining access to the vehicles without the caregiver's knowledge were reasons why children were left alone in vehicles longer than intended, compared with the number who endorsed these as reasons why children overheat in vehicles. Now, when asked to describe at-risk caregivers, 49% had a negative or judgmental view of at-risk caregivers, which were caregivers that were either irresponsible or caregivers under the influence of some substance. 41% were sympathetic and said caregivers who were stressed or have had little to no sleep could be at risk. And 26% of the responses were incomplete, where they were instead describing a scenario rather than a caregiver. When asked about their knowledge on various PVH awareness campaigns and slogans, 47% were not aware of any initiatives. 95% believed it was extremely important that caregivers have education about leaving their children in vehicles. 90% were somewhat or extremely likely to use reminder or alerting technologies in their vehicles, and 83% said they would consider paying for such a technology. Now, the figure here depicts caregivers' beliefs about how adopting mitigating strategies would change perceived caregiving abilities. Now, when they were asked if they believed other caregivers would view their caregiving capabilities differently if they use a technology to prevent a child from being left in a vehicle, as shown in the figure on the left, participants were split. 35% said yes, 32% said no, and 31% said maybe. Of those who said yes and maybe, 64% believe others would view them as a better caregiver if they adopted those technologies. 21% believe they would be viewed as a worse caregiver. 3% responded both better or worse, or it would depend. And 1% were unsure about the directionality of these views. Now, when asked if they would view other caregivers' capabilities differently if they used a technology, or shown in the figure on the right, more caregivers responded no, which was 41%, with 37% and 19% saying yes or maybe, respectively. Of those who said yes and maybe, 76% said they would view others as a better caregiver if they adopted technology. 14% said they would view others as a worse caregiver. 2% responded both better or worse, or it would depend. And less than 1% reported they were unsure about the directionality of these views. So to summarize, most caregivers reported they do not leave their children alone in a vehicle for any amount of time. Few caregivers believe they were at any risk for accidentally leaving children in a vehicle or having a child overheat in one. Most caregivers described negative or judgmental views of those who were at risk. However, despite negative views of those perceived to be at risk, 9 out of 10 caregivers indicated that it was important that caregivers receive education about PVH, and they would be willing to adopt risk mitigating technologies themselves. Most caregivers believe they and others would be perceived as a better caregiver if they adopted risk mitigating technologies. So these findings have an important insight for efforts seeking to identify caregivers at risk for PVH and those encouraging more uptake and reliable use of various risk mitigating technologies. The dissonant finding that caregivers view those who may be at risk for PVH negatively, while simultaneously viewing those who adopt risk mitigating strategies positively, provides stakeholders with unique insight for future efforts. Specifically, messaging utilizing themes of positive caregiving might be more effective at increasing caregivers' adoption than threat-based campaigns focused on communicating risk. Finally, I'd like to thank the Toyota Collaborative Safety Research Center, or CSRC, for funding this work. And that is all I have for you today. And I'd be happy to take any questions if you have to email me. My email is provided in these slides. And yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jalaj. And we do have some questions, so I'll try to direct them at the speakers. Our presenters, I welcome you to come back on camera so the attendees can to see you as you're answering. The first question, I believe, is for Jan, and Kelly asks, is there any correlating data between child deaths and a mother with a perinatal mood disorder?
Yeah, that is an awesome question. And actually, when I was going through my slides, that occurred to me when we're looking at people, the younger parents with younger children, how stressed out they were and how it increased through the end of the week. I do not know of any studies. Anyone out there want to do one? I think it would really add to the dialogue.
Great, thank you so much, Jan. Do any of the other presenters have anything to add on that knowledge? I think this one could be both for Andy and for Jalaj. It was mentioned that it'd be less impactful to mention groups of people who may be susceptible versus emphasizing that it can happen to anyone, but then mentioned even nurses, law enforcement, etc., have been affected. Is there any information around the effectiveness of discussing the circumstances of when this happens, such as schedule changes, etc.? And I believe that they're referring to deaths or fatalities.
I'm not certain of that. Jalaj, do you have?
So data on groups that might be susceptible, I think from the real world scenarios, I believe that there is enough evidence that this can happen to anyone. And I don't think it's like parents who are under the influence or responsible caregivers, but I think caregivers are still under the impression, based on our data as well, that this can only happen to, say, quote, bad caregivers. So I think when we are framing those messaging campaigns or educating people about this PVH scenario, it's important to highlight that this can happen to anyone. And I believe the second part of the question is for you, Andy, about the nurses and law enforcement.
Right. And actually, Jan, I believe you had collected some data about the different kinds of people this has happened to. And before, the reason I'd mentioned nurses and other medical professionals, because I know children will often see them and they're often trusted sources of information. So, speaking with your pediatrician or your nurse or your preschool teacher, I think they're people that provide trusted sources of information that might be helpful. Jan, I don't know if you had
Yeah, I don't have anything qualitatively though, and it might just be because they're kind of fairly large groups are teachers and nurses, and also those oftentimes get called out in the media. So yeah, but again, that's just a qualitatively. I don't know of any specific numbers that look at the occupations or the roles other than a parent, a relative, or like a professional caregiver.
Great. And then there's a follow-up question on that. Do you think it would happen less often if there was a definitive violation imposed upon caregivers who leave children unattended, and specifically those that result in a death?
Yeah, I think that the sample sizes are relatively small, and to try and suss out which states have laws against leaving children in cars, and the numbers of instances in those states versus states that don't have laws. I haven't been able to see enough differentiation in the data to be able to say anything definitively.
Okay. And then the clarification from the question before, and thank you to the attendee who shared that, they were really looking for about the effectiveness of educating on circumstances when this happens, rather than focusing on the type of people or to whom it happens, as we discussed.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of educating parents and caregivers on focusing on the circumstances rather than the type of caregiver, because I think there are preconceived notions as to who this can happen to. So instead highlighting that, say, even if you leave your child behind for 5 or 10 minutes, the temperature of the vehicle can rise significantly fast, and this can happen to anyone. I think that's a better way of communicating to parents and caregivers rather than, pinning this on a type of caregiver.
Okay. And then a question from Don, should efforts be focused mainly on first-time parents? Sharon, you're shaking your head
No,
no?
I'm just thinking, we see the second and third time parents even more tired than the first. So I think we generally don't narrow it down that way. There's a lot of baby products that you want to sell to a first time parent because there's a great opportunity. But for products like Sensor Safe, we see equal use, no matter if it's your first or third child.
Well, that leads a great segue to our next question. So thank you for setting us up, Sharon. This one is for you. Can you speak to how accessible or affordable some of the technologies that you reviewed are? The concern from the attendee was that some families aren't even able to afford car seats.
Yeah, I know. And then that's why I put cost as one of my challenges too, right? Because I'm sure all the car seat manufacturers are going through the same process. It's like, this is what it costs us to make this technology, and this is what a consumer is willing to pay for it. And it doesn't add up. And so typically I was just checking on some of the SRPs of the things I listed. And in most cases, these technologies add or you might have to buy for $30 to $60 is usually the range for these technologies. It's not cheap. And on top of when you're already spending a few $100s on a car seat, it's, like I said, it's not accessible. And there could be a future, well, I don't think this will happen, but like in Italy and Israel, in Italy in particular, there's a government subsidy to purchase these types of products. When they made it a law, there was money to help purchase these types of devices, but they're not affordable for everyone, unfortunately. That's a challenge we have to face.
Yeah, it's also a challenge with the newer vehicles that are having technologies put in them, are very effective
Right.
technologies, but rolling them out, at 10% of the cars on the road each year are new. And, at the rate they get rolled out, it's going to be 20 plus years before you have 30% of the cars on the road will have these technologies. And those are going to be not evenly distributed, with fewer of the people in underserved communities with lower incomes are going to be the ones getting those first. And I think that's a really important metric. How do we include those people as well?
Yeah. So maybe comparatively, that $30 to $60 isn't so bad when it's the only other way to this technology is a new car with quite an expensive technology added onto it.
And I like the fact of it getting subsidized in some way.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And then another question, do you think that there will be a time when car seat manufacturers will be required to make car seats with this technology?
That's a little bit of a crystal ball question. I don't.
It is.
I hope so. No, I have no insight into that. I hope so. Like, I think a few people on this call would probably hope that. I know I keep saying I hope that it becomes a requirement for vehicle manufacturers, but I guess I have to see it from the same point of view that I see it, where it's like, they're doing the same calculation, right? It's expensive to add to a car too. So I don't know. I don't know if it will ever become law for either vehicles or for child passenger seats.
Right. Absolutely.
I'd
Go
just
ahead.
like to add to that, and this is just my view, just looking at the cases that occur out there. There are cases that occur with the child strapped in the child seat, but there are a lot of cases where child gains access to the vehicle and is not necessarily in the child seat. So I'm not sure what's the final technology that we can install, but I think car seat manufacturers and NHTSA is already working on trying to assess what's the best way to prevent these tragedies from happening. But I think the educational component is a big component of this. If parents and caregivers are aware that this can happen to them, I think that's a great first intervention before just blaming everything on technology.
Yeah.
And so Barbara asks or states that she finds it perplexing that there are states that allow a person 10 minutes in Missouri or 15 minutes in Florida to leave a child in the car when they could perish in less time. Are you aware of any push for legislation in not only these states, but all states?
I haven't heard of any active legislation to try and amend those. I know child safety groups in those states have made, efforts to try and get something started, but to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing active at this time, unfortunately.
Anybody else? All right, and one related question for our pet lovers out there. Kim has asked, is anyone tracking data on pets that you know of? Because we hear of similar circumstances surrounding pet deaths as well.
I have talked a bit with the AVMA, American Veterinary Medicine Association, and they tell me, you know, when I talk about, you know, on average 38 children a year, they go hundreds, if not thousands of pets per year.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Jan. And then one final question, and then we'll do some closing announcements. The legislation seems to focus on caregiver blaming. Technology is limited by the uptake. What are the panelists' thoughts on efforts focused on helping parents with cognitive or behavioral practices? Anybody want to take that one? Mm-hmm. No?
I don't think I have anything to offer on that one.
Okay. So we'll leave that one as an open. Perhaps we could take that to the Pediatric Vehicular Heat Stroke Academic Work Group, and they can work on addressing that one. And stay tuned for more information on that. And I believe that we do have a few more slides that I want to share with you, and starting with some resources. As a reminder, May 1st is National Heat Stroke Prevention Day, and this is the day provided to all of us where we can all work together to put a spotlight on heat stroke to increase awareness, provide education, and make an impact in reducing heat stroke cases. We have several new evidence-based heat stroke resources to share with you. All of these resources have been developed. They are free to you, and we encourage you to help get them out in the communities, sharing them with your partners and caregivers. So first, NHTSA has provided some great new educational tools to share. You can find them at trafficsafetymarketing.gov under the Heat Stroke Prevention Guides category. And you'll see an example of some of the assets here on this slide. They focus on the 3 primary circumstances of PVH and actions that can be taken to prevent them. Additionally, the National Safety Council has partnered with Texas Our Driving Concern program to develop a variety of workplace-focused resources for national use. These tools are to heighten the safety culture in a workplace setting, as nearly a quarter of PVH cases occur at the caregiver's place of employment. Of course, these resources can be used from the workplace to any place, and you can find them at cpsboard.org/heat stroke under the National Safety Council's tab. And then we also have available a free e-learning, which provides you the opportunity to connect members of the community with valuable and respective safety education. And through the online education, Children in Hot Cars, this training is available in English and Spanish. It takes about 10 minutes to complete the training and provides an overview of the 3 primary circumstances that lead to children dying in hot cars and how we can work together to prevent these tragedies. A proof of completion certificate is provided at the end. The English version will be, an updated English version will be released in the very, very, very near future, and Spanish will follow later behind this summer. You can find these resources at carseateducation.org/hot-cars. And if you would like to use this training, you can do so in a group delivery setting. Through a group delivery, you can enroll students or learners in the courses and track their progress. And this is a great opportunity to use the e-learning as an enrichment option in birthing classes for new parents, babysitter certification courses, to heighten the safety culture at daycare centers or other workplace settings, provide organizational training for people transporting children, staff training for healthcare providers and first responders, or community education for our child passenger safety technicians. If you need help setting up your group, please email training@cpsboard.org. And then we have the next 2 webinars scheduled in our series, and we hope that you can join us for one of the upcoming webinars. On May 16th, we'll be looking at the backseat blitz, trends in newer vehicles and CPS. And then on June 20th, it'll be all about airbags 201. So taking it beyond the what you learn in your technician course. Please visit cpsboard.org/webinars to register. And again, a big thank you to all of our presenters for joining us today. We're seeing great comments in the chat and the Q&A for the information that you've shared. So we do appreciate the time that you have spent with us today. Please remember that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the Child Passenger Safety Learning Portal at carseateducation.org in approximately 1 to 2 business days. So thank you to everybody, and we hope that you have a safe day.